why don't we start why don't you just say a few words of introduction about yourself? I'm sure everybody will know you, but go ahead.
Sure. Well, good morning, good afternoon, evening. I'm Paul Rubenstein. I'm the former Chief People Officer at Visier. I've been the Chief Customer Officer. I'm a former consultant at Mercer and Hewitt, and I am the Chief Evangelist at Visier, which means I get to talk to the most challenging problems that our customers and help heads of HR and analytics teams and technology teams figure out what's the best way to drive organizational performance through the insights you get from technology. So very much, I come from a world and a mindset where we start with the business problem and work backwards to the data and tech. And that's what I go preach, inspire, help with. It's kind of a labor of love.
Well, amazing, Paul. Thank you. And delighted to have you here with us today. So I'm Julian Holmes. I'm one of the exec at Lace. I lead our workforce transformation practice. So that's everything, strategic workforce planning, absolutely, organization design, target operating model, skills, work, task, you name it. So and my background is in Big Four consulting, and I also had a time in software with a software product called OrgView. So I think I've seen this this domain space from lots of different angles throughout my career. But anyway, enough about us, but welcome everybody, and we'll just sort of kick off. So I guess the first thing we want to talk about is maybe just to share, it really feels like, certainly in the UK and European market, and I'm sure you'd agree in the US market as well, Paul, North America, is just how hot SWP is right now. I mean, it's, such a conversation, right?
It's amazing. I've always felt like Europe had a better structure, discipline in each organization around it, as well as certain industries globally, pharma, manufacturing, et cetera, were better than others. But now, right, the North American markets are catching up to Europe in the need and recognition that workforce planning. I was on a webinar a couple of months ago, and a former head of HR said, workforce planning is like the Rodney Dangerfield of HR. It doesn't get any respect, and now it is, right? People are saying this is important. It's a profession. It's not a process. It's a lifestyle.
Yeah, amazing. And we were just going to sort of touch a little bit on, what are some of those factors that do you think are just raising SWP up to be so high profile at the moment, Paul?
Oh, I mean, the economy, AI, the actual math of the labor population, the imbalance in skills and capabilities, the distribution of, it's all coming to a head. But the number one thing, right, that I would even say, influences is pace, right? The pace of AI and the pace of change and the pace of economic swings. It's not like it used to be, right? The need for planning has always been there, but the pace of planning has changed. Like, I had a customer, what did he say? Hey, Paul, we were catching up. He's like, we're doing our annual workforce plan and revisiting it 2, sometimes 3 times a quarter right now. And I'm like, oh, that's awesome. And I look at him and it's like, well, why do you call it an annual workforce plan still? And he's like, I don't know, sense of humor, right? And it's just amazing to me, the something that had its own traditions and own rhythm, right, is now being forced to look like something it isn't, right? And it's causing stress. It's causing stress on the technology, on the practice, on the practitioners, because I don't know that everybody had envisioned workforce planning with the number of dimensions that we now want to understand, and with the pace that we want to understand, and with the distributed nature of it, right? So, that's a lot of change for anybody, for any practice.
100%. And, I alluded to it already. I spent a lot of my time in my career looking at things like target operating model and organization design. And I can never quite understand why SWP was sort of treated as being this sort of separate edifice with no relationship between them. one of the things that I also used to observe about those, related disciplines was how static they always felt to
Oh my
me.
God.
Set somehow you have to look 3 years into the future, 5 years into the future. You have to put that stake in the ground, and then you have to march everybody towards that one outcome, regardless of what happens to your industry, to your markets, your customers, in any of those things. So it sort of feels to me like I think, and I think different clients, different organizations are at different places in this journey, but I think gradually people are beginning to realize that, hey, we need a way that we can be so much more dynamic about how we think about
Exactly.
our people and our workforce, and what we need to be a successful organization. And hopefully Rupert Morrison, who's my old boss at Allview, won't mind me repeating this, thing he sort of used to say. He used to say, well, OD, it's great, but it's kind of like a photo. But what we really need is a sort of a movie. And SWP is more like the movie. If you're so
Absolutely.
inclined, I'd say SWP is a bit more like the kind of video game. And
It's feeling like a video game.
not just one kind of movie, right? So yeah,
Julian, you said something in there that's really like language is important, right? Our traditions and our practices and norms come from language. Target operating model, right? I want to strike that one out and call it the moving target operating model. And I think the notion of why the targets are moving so quickly is worth spending a little bit of time on with this audience, because it speaks to the inputs and the level of granularity, and the things that the workforce plan is solving for are different than they were 3, 5, 7 years ago, right? And nothing has amped it up more to me than AI, right? This notion, like when I grew up doing technology transformations, right? We'd put in PeopleSoft or Workday or an applicant tracking system, or some sort of ERP-ish sort of technology. And if we were lucky, we got that stuff up in 6 to 9 months. The norm for most people's experience was 12 to 15 months.
sure.
And every great technology had this trade, right? I'm going to spend on technology. It's going to save me some labor. I mean, that's just right. And so you had this 12 months to plan the switch of labor out, right? And that was what you planned for in your strategic workforce plan. But the technology's ability to impact jobs and tasks, the cycle in AI is looking like every, 4 to 8 weeks, something is switching. So instead of having and there has to be some economic payment, right? You can't take on all this technology cost without either really impacting your top line or balancing it out with the bottom line. And we do that through labor, productivity, et cetera. And at a certain point, we have to, plan a new workforce to accommodate for the recombined and reimagined jobs, right? I think the trick here, right, again, like I said, is this pace. I forgot where I was going, but I think I made the point about pace.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, what is interesting to me though is how much, to some degree, the narrative of SWP that talks about. So we talk to a lot of clients who, shall we say, are more at the beginning of their journey. Well, what it sort of feels like is that they've learned SWP almost through the sort of history of SWP, the last 20 years, the last 10 years, the last 5 years. So they tend to enter SWP with that real focus on FTEs and cost as being the thing that's really sort of, front of mind, even though they then say,
yeah,
but the problem we're trying to solve for is for flexibility, for productivity, for being more competitive. And, one of the things, I know you've heard me sort of say before, right, is we tend to find that clients start very much with the what of SWP. So the processes, the systems, I need a new piece of software, my data isn't good enough. And yet, our experience is that, and that sometimes leads to these, back to these sort of building of these kind of monolithic kind of machines. We're going to have a big SWP process. We're going to try and align it with the finance planning process, and it feels very heavy and very sort of process driven. Um, But too often they're not asking themselves the why of SWP. Well, what's the business outcome we're trying to drive? What are the actions or the decisions we want to take off the back of doing SWP? And how do we know whether we'd actually delivered any value through this activity or not? So, in summary, really encouraging everyone we talk to think as much about the why of SWP as the what of SWP, and just how that chimes with your experience.
I love where you're going with this, right? Because, and the what is way beyond FTE in dollars or beyond FTE dollars in location, right? And the way I try to explain it to people is think about the shape, right? I don't love this analogy, so audience, please grant me grace with this, okay? But think about the shape of a wedding dress, right? And, like you getting ready for your wedding, it's a big day. And you want to look good in it, and you can't just, it's not just about how much you weigh, right? It's the shape, okay? And so when I think about the workforce, it's not about how many dollars in FTEs you have, it's the shape of the workforce. Do you have the right skills composition related to a specific product launch or a market? Do you have the right spans and layers that gives you a optimized and probably benchmarks shape for your organization control, right? Do you have the right leadership capabilities baked across this, right? We can go on and on. Each organization will have its own set of dimensions, but it could also go down to and when I say skill level, do you have the right science skills, right? If you're going to launch your next drug, or engineering skills, if you're going to build your next bridge, whatever that might be. And then are you actually actively trading in a from to way? And what I mean by that, you hear about a lot of organizations wanting, I'll take software organizations. For years, services was a dirty word, right? Now we talk about forward deployed engineers and the people to be able to understand not just selling products, but selling solutions. How are you measuring that from to in your workforce plan? So there's a lot of dimensions to be considered in the workforce plan to make it truly strategic and not just something that you could do a long-term real estate forecast off of. By the way, we don't build real estate anymore in companies. We rent it. We try to get in and out of those leases as quick as possible so that we have fluidity, right, in our cost structure. And so there's a whole lot of traditions that led to the processes that aren't necessarily make it the right stamp. But I always tell everyone, enter strategic workforce planning with the beginner's mind, right?
Yeah.
First principles thinking, despite the traditions, how would you do it differently today?
Perfect. And I think what that leads us very nicely onto as well, and it touches with one of the things we've been talking about, in particular the impact of AI, is of course really to do SWP successfully in the current market is to have a much better understanding of work and the roles people play and the tasks that they do. So I don't know whether you've got some insights on that. I know we were talking earlier about, in different organizations, who's going to have the hot potato of who gets to own the definition of work and task in an organization. So great to get
hot potato. It's hot potato, Julian, right? There's this great unclaimed space. Somebody needs to be chief work officer, right? Mm-hmm. And it is a really urgent thing. And by the way, for everyone out there who does workforce planning, just understand work is the title of it. Work, and the force is the people. The work is the work. And I think there are some industries, and there was an age at which understanding work and the continuous improvement of work was part of a culture and competitive advantage. Remember when you couldn't get hired or you couldn't have a team unless you had at least one Six Sigma black belt on it, right? And we were all like there's a beauty in that. I spoke to a group of early career professionals, and I talked about activity-based costing. They looked at me like I had 10 heads, right? And I'm like, no. The fundamental analysis of tasks, right, is critical right now because we talked about that tech spend, right? Companies are accumulating tech spend. And by the way, it's costing more than they thought. We've all heard about the token issues. And I think it's going to get even worse because now all these companies have new financial pressure to deliver margin, right? So tech spend goes up, but admittedly, and we've seen the articles in the Wall Street Journal, we've heard Sam Altman talk about it and all the other AI leaders talk about it. It's not delivering the labor displacement that they evangelized, right? And they had good reason to do it because, to make the economic case, it's giving people fractional productivity gains. Yeah. And at a certain point, if you deconstruct somebody's job and say, what is the fractional productivity gain? Can I actually lay this person off? No, I really only made their hand efficient. You can't lay off a hand. So I either have to, I have a couple of choices. I can mindfully add new tasks and new capabilities to that person's task. I can lay them off, but that work still has to get done. I can recombine those jobs in a new strategic workforce plan, a design of the workforce. But to do that, I need to understand work and I need data about work, right? Yeah. So I come from and spent the last years deep in people analytics, right, where we really understood skills and jobs and people and engagement and pay and all that other stuff. Org charts, right? People love org charts, but they have been mostly not digital, right, or static information. Who reports to who, PowerPoints and some tools, and then finance really cares about task, output, financial results. I urge everybody who is in workforce planning, analytics, and HR to throw all that away and move into a world that I will call workforce intelligence, right? That brings the data of people and work together so that everybody can make good decisions about how to pace the change of technology, recombine jobs, right? Recombine the tasks into rational jobs, create new organizations that are able to leverage an agent-human mix in a rational way. But most importantly, everybody has to wake up and stop what's happening in most AI transformations where we're simply applying AI to existing jobs and processes. We've got to get to a culture of redesigning work with first principles thinking. And I think nobody is better positioned to help, elevate that conversation than the people in strategic workforce planning, because that's where it all comes together. It is the golden age for anybody in planning.
I just couldn't agree with you more. And I think one of the pieces I just wanted to pick out, because I think is implicit in what you said, Paul, but I want to make explicit, is I think a very natural focus. If I say the word productivity, the focus tends to be on the cost element of that, the efficiency piece on this. Where could I shave off, 3 FTEs or 5 FTEs, whatever the number is. And you're quite right. The actual ability to implement that and realize that is really hard. What is super interesting to me in this AI world, and we know from our own day-to-day uses that AI can actually help us do much more.
Exactly.
Right. So what about the top line of the impact of AI? And actually not even just AI. How can I service my customers better? How can I really start to innovate my products in a way that, actually begins to address needs that perhaps even my customers haven't even thought about yet? And that to me feels like that will be, and this is going to take a lot longer, right? But I think in this first phase, inevitably people are trying to go for that low hanging fruit. They're trying to go for the cost piece. But let's face it, probably where the real revolution will become, or evolution will be on the productivity.
On the top line.
Line of productivity.
Julian, you remind me of a story. I worked for a CEO and she used to say, you can't shrink your way to greatness. Right?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
And I that sticks with me to this day when I think about the ability for AI to unlock human potential, right? And you're right. What is lasting competitive advantage that we should be planning and designing for? It isn't always going to be cost leadership right? Because at a certain point, everybody will have the same access to tools and technology. But when you, especially if you just layer it on existing processes, right? But when you flip the switch and start to use AI and understand the tasks and people and skills that you have and recombine them, right? Okay, this is a terrible analogy, and I apologize to the audience in advance, right? But you know when you do mise en place in a restaurant and you put all the ingredients out together, right? Looking at that, the chef can come in and say, what is the special of the day? Because tastes may have changed. And they have that flexibility because they understand at the component layer, and they're able to recombine and reinvent and see what happens. That agility, right, for an organization to unlock is huge. Now, it requires data and planning.
I can see a very contrived metaphor now, Paul, about, mise en place or doing the prep before you cook being a little bit like workforce segments. But let's move on, right?
Okay.
We'll move on, but let's not, otherwise it will probably...
We could go down this rabbit hole. Next thing you know, it's... Right, we're doing Ratatouille, the movie. But I think if you zoom out for a second, what this requires in workforce planning, again, is a bit of rethinking, right? Yeah. Because you're constantly recombining and reinventing and rethinking. And so remember you started talking about target operating models. I mean, we were saying it's a moving target operating model. I think there is a reticence among HR people and often workforce planners. They want to identify a target and build the math backwards from it.
Yeah.
I would say in the future, what we're building towards is zones of confidence. So if you ever see like a hurricane map, and it's got we can predict it might go between these 2 points, because you can't have full agility in an organization, right? But you can create zones of confidence and make decisions within that increase the probability that you're going to have the right people and the right skills in the right time at the right place within a probable path that the business is going to take. So you're preconceiving what you could do if the economy ticks up a little bit or ticks down a little bit without rash reactions of layoffs or crappy hiring that has to happen fast, and in a non-planful way, right? There's better ways of doing this.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. So, when I was doing some of my SWP pieces of projects, with one of the big four firms, we used to spend a lot of time on demand scenarios. And look, again, interested if anybody wants to post a question on the Q&A or a point of view on the Q&A, interested to see what people think about this is. In the end, I actually decided that having multiple scenarios usually wasn't that helpful, because when you really figured it out, you're really saying, do I think my plan is going to be, do I want to understand what happens if my plan is much more successful than I thought it was going to be? Do I want to understand what it is when it's less successful than it's going to be? And then maybe there might be a scenario around the mix is different for whatever reason, right? There's a particular business scenario you need to do it. But I used to think by the time you got beyond kind of 3 scenarios, you were probably kind of, I'm not sure you ever really learned more by that ultra sophisticated demand planning. The only places I saw that done, I think with some rationale behind it, was, big public sector organizations who were really, they were thinking about what was happening with the economy as much as with their particular workforce, something like healthcare, for example.
Can I ask you a question, though? You brought up the demand side of the equation. Julian, I think a lot of our audience, and especially HR people, they're not that comfortable or familiar with the demand side of workforce planning. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I suppose my education on the demand side of workforce planning is, hold it against me. I was a finance guy, right? Many years ago. So we had to build, I guess, the demand side, in terms of understanding what the top line of the business was like to be, what the mix was going to be between products and services. And I don't think it's a huge secret to say, starting with, finance, and if you've got one, your head of strategy and your head of transformation's view on where the business is likely to go and what a couple of likely, useful scenarios to look at is probably a good basis to look at demand. Here's the issue. It depends on your finance team. It depends on your strategy team. Is sometimes they might have a rather simplistic view on what workforce does to contribute to that plan. And Paul, I would say almost universally the most successful SWP projects I did was when one of the outcomes was we took the finance team and the strategy team on a journey where all of a sudden they went, aha, we can't just do whatever we want and expect our workforce to turn on a dime and deliver new businesses, new capabilities, just by simply assuming that the market has an infinite number of people that we need and we can hire them for no money instantaneously, right? And let alone starting to get into, wow, you've got a workforce here who have all the skill set that you just need to do a little bit of retraining and reframing of them, and they could fulfill that capacity that you need so much easier than going out to the market. So I think and I think this is I don't think it's helpful to look at these things as kind of a them vs us. To my mind, SWP is a joint business activity,
Absolutely.
which HR has an absolutely key role to play. If you find yourself doing it in isolation of your finance colleagues and your strategy colleagues, that might not be a very comfortable place either for you or for them for the long term. Let's put it like that. So the more you can ally with them, the better.
100%. What's interesting, and for this audience, Lace and Visier do quite a bit of work together on planning and analytics. The fastest growing user group within Visier, theoretically bought by IT or HR, fastest growing group, finance.
Yeah.
Because finance loves this because they can actually begin to predict with certainty, right? And use models to say, when are people really going to leave or come? When is that hire actually going to get filled, right? And besides just planning the business, this has a lot of benefits in how you do accruals, and it's got real cash implications for the organization. So that's so good. The second thing that you made me think of is I reposted an article I read recently about trust. And it was about the trust between candidates and recruiters and how broken it was because candidates were using AI to flood every job opportunity. But recruiters and companies have lots of fake posting because they're not sure what to plan for. And they want to constantly testing the market and get ahead. So it's wild how the long tail of planning's effectiveness can impact whole markets and, quite frankly, the reputation of a company as an employment brand in whether they're really hiring or not. So just a big shout out to everybody in their workforce planning to understand how much impact they can have.
So I think it might be helpful, we do have a loose plan, I promise you, audience, it might be helpful maybe to talk about this idea of trying to establish some kind of rhythm around strategic workforce planning. And I know you had some thoughts on that, Paul. So are you okay to kick off on that one?
So I think it's funny, especially if you're a workforce planner out there and you report to HR, you probably experience, even if you came out of finance, you probably experience the strength of the HR calendar, right? It's immovable. We've got performance review time, we've got pension review time, we've got benefits review time, we've got and it is a calendar. Whether the business is going up or down, HR has its rhythm, period. Who doesn't have that rhythm is finance. Right? They've got an annual plan that they have to do for, but depending on what's going on in the business, fluctuations, identifications of gap and opportunity, and the reallocation of resources based on that has an incredible dynamism month to month, quarter to quarter. I think it is, in this day and age, it's time for HR, and this is where workforce planning becomes central to HR's operating rhythm. Workforce planning should be the right hand of the CHRO, right? especially if it is truly strategic. Because we need to redesign and redesign the workforce to take advantage of or react to the AI opportunities and economic changes and the speed, right? We've got to plan the workforce based on those designs, right? And constantly replan the workforce based on actuals and changes and gaps and opportunities. We've got to operate the workforce always looking at those gaps and opportunities so that we can redesign, plan, and that planning means everybody understands it. Real estate, recruiting, training, etc., and in all those dimensions, right? So this design, plan, and operate at a fast cadence where we may be updating the workforce plan monthly, just like we do the forecast actuals and projections in finance. That's the future rhythm of not just planning, but of HR. And then all of HR, recruiting, learning, pay, whatever it is, follows that rhythm and reacts to the changes in the needs of the business as defined by the always changing workforce plan. Does that make sense?
To me, 100%, right? And I think
finance guy.
I mean, well, and absolutely. So what I was going to do was just tie this back. Is again interesting to talk to clients. Again, there's been a few postings certainly in LinkedIn in the UK market around strategic workforce planning, saying, do you know what? I'm trying to run my quarterly cycle or my annual cycle, and I keep on being interrupted because somebody comes to me and says, we've got a project to do, like, we're looking at our location strategy, or we're going to do an M&A project. I'm having to sit down with my OD colleagues, or I'm having to work with my people analytics colleagues, whoever's running talent and skills, right? Your workforce intelligence. And I think, almost it's interesting to me is I think that perhaps traditional SWP is being pulled now into this much more dynamic kind of business planning, business project, business investment, decision-making process supporting exco. And the other thing that I would really encourage for anybody on this call who's not, as well as being close to your finance colleagues and your IT colleagues, just as important that is, hey, start getting really close with some of your HR colleagues who may be sitting 3 desks down, but are you really spending enough quality time with them? And in fact, does it even make sense, for example, that your org design team and your SWP team will be working on different projects? Right? I mean, aren't they, to me, I know this is a slightly controversial opinion, is I look at these things as really just being different lenses on the same fundamental question, which is, how is the business changing? What kind of workforce do we need? How are we going to organize that workforce? What kind of skills do they need? And how's that going to develop in the future, right? And that to me is, again, for historical reasons, those have always seemed to be separate disciplines. But to my mind, I think it's inevitable that those disciplines need to come together. But interested in your view.
So I think, this is where going back to the history, like how much does the history inform the process, and how much does this desire to keep things simple limit the amount of value we get out of something? So for instance, how often, like I may be a workforce planner and I am interested in the multiple dimensions that we can plan for, right? And planning for multiple scenarios. And by the way, if I'm a workforce planner and I'm, multivariable math is hard. AI is great at it. Okay. So like greatest gift to ever happen to workforce planning is AI. But we know that planning doesn't happen in a vacuum. In many organizations, it's a distributed operation. And the endpoint, right? The spreadsheet that we send out and roll up. How often does a strategic workforce planner or a centralized planner hear, you got to make that sheet simpler. I don't want to spend the time doing it. It takes too much. You're asking for too many things, etc. Okay. It's funny. We want simplicity and sophistication at the same time. And that is actually hard to do. So again, culture and having a real vision and having executives who champion and understand the value of the workforce plan to say, no, this is just as important as you reviewing the monthly P&L. And in fact, when we come back to the operating rhythm, the opportunity for workforce planning to do the analysis of gap to plan and help people make better decisions on location, hiring, et cetera, before it shows up in the P&L is an incredible opportunity for planning and HR to have better business impact, right? Often, I find, something shows up in the P&L and it's like, okay, now we got to go change the plan because of an execution issue or a visibility issue. We didn't hire in time or we overhired, et cetera. The more we can move that forward out of ahead of the accounting cycle rather than responding to it, the better businesses will perform.
And Paul, there's a much more kind of simple implication about what you're talking about. And I hate to go back to finance, right? If there's an issue in one of your business units, finance doesn't ask the whole enterprise to replan. Exactly. They only ask the business unit that they've got a problem. And I think, and again, sometimes that's a trap, perhaps, historically that SWP has fallen into, is the feeling that everybody needs to plan at the same level of detail all the time.
At the same time, yeah,
right?
but there's understand, and I have empathy for this, right? Because so many HR functions were run for cost,
yeah,
and in order to run at cost, you had to, sameness, right? We want one scalable process. We want one centralized process. We want to, have the fewest people touching it as possible. The challenge is, if you click up a layer and think about this strategically, sameness does not yield greatness when it comes to talent strategy, right? Each portfolio needs a different thing. It has its own rhythm, right? You don't plan with the same parameters for the part of the business you're running for cash versus the part of the business you're running for growth, okay? And being able to, and each one may have different economic cycles going on, right? And so you have to reflect those nuances in your plan if you're going to really drive if you're chasing alpha rather than just trying to be mediocre. And I think that's an important dissonance. And a lot of HR people don't like that, by the way.
No, they don't. No, they don't. I mean, and let's face it, it's totally legitimate. And I can think about a client, we worked with last year where actually cost pressure actually was their number one business issue. It wasn't, they had certainly other things that they were working on. And then, yeah, absolutely. In that case, having a really tightly aligned SWP process, very aligned to the finance process, but making it more sophisticated is really important. Actually, Paul, we've just had a question come through from Alexander. He's saying, how do you ensure that strategic workforce planning is truly anchored on skills and not headcount as a starting point? And how do we ensure that requirements are not automatically solved as buy, recruit, rather than also thinking about borrow, buy, bot, right?
Great question. And this speaks to cadence, right? And who is reviewing what gaps and opportunities there are in the plan at what cycle? Okay, so I'm going to oversimplify this and help me, Julian, here. To me, it always starts with the rec. Okay. And I think the rec is an antiquated beast at this point, but because it's more of a control mechanism than.
You mean the reconciliation, just to be clear, compare.
Oh, no.
What do you mean by rec? Oh, no, go on.
I'm sorry. I mean the job requisition.
Job requisition.
Sorry. I spent too much time with talent acquisition people. Okay, hey, Bob left. The immediate reflexive reaction is open a requisition because we have to replace Bob.
100%.
Interrupt. And if you're a line manager, you want continuity of your operation. You don't want to sit and reimagine your entire work stream, right? You don't want, you want fast and easy because you're under pressure and you operate with inertia. Interrupting that flow through people and insights to say, hey, Bob has left. You have a moment, a golden opportunity. All right. Don't just look at the immediate pain you're in, but let's make it easy and apparent that, hey, borrowing labor for Bob actually makes more financial sense and you will be rewarded for it and it will show up, right? Or reallocating or redesigning the work at that moment because in 2 years from now, you're not going to need Bob's job because tech is going to replace it, or 1 year from now, right? So how do you get ahead of whatever, making it visible and easy so that small moment can be aligned to a larger strategy and outcome rather than just the needs and inertial reaction of that manager. That's where the rhythm and insights, and you have to make sure those insights are consumable by mere mortals, by the way. Everyone in strategic workforce planning, not everyone understands the language of HR or what build, borrow, buy, or bot is, okay? So we have to speak in the language of the business. We have to get into the headspace of the moment you're trying to influence and work backwards into your process. So Alexander, great question. Julian, thoughts?
I think the only thing I would add is business context is everything. And the other, I guess, is another way of saying that would be, it kind of depends on what kind of workforce segment you're looking at. So it's totally legitimate for some parts of the business where actually just keeping the flow of candidates coming is the right thing because, you're in a growth phase, continuity of service, you've got client needs to meet, and trying to start a conversation, but do they have the right skills in that context is probably not going to be helpful. Ideally, of course, is that you would have had this conversation well before there was some sort of labor issue. We'd say, look, we've got an opportunity here to think about automating some of this work or to realign the skill set, what we need. Guess what? In this particular area, I'm thinking of particularly of some work that McDonald's reported on the European market, where they were really thinking about the role of restaurant managers, right? And just to say, for McDonald's, restaurant managers make a massive difference, the quality of the managers to the business outcomes they achieve in individual restaurants. I'm not going to do the stats justice, but the one that I understood was people will drive past to McDonald's to go to McDonald's that's run well, and it's run well by a manager with particular characteristics and capabilities. Basically, it makes a huge difference there. So, let's not drain this one. It was a great question, Alexander. I think what I would always say is understanding the B's, understanding that skills important, that's really important, but to some degree, not to try and impose that on your business leaders, instead rather say to the business leaders, well, what are the problems that you're trying to solve? And what are the options that we've got that we can address it? And sometimes it might be buy, but sometimes it might be, do you know what? This looks like a seasonal thing, or this looks like something that's a non-core activity for us. Could we move to a rental model for this going forward?
Exactly.
So anyway, I think hopefully I've done it justice. Yeah.
You raise an interesting thing about the relationship of the strategic workforce plan and planner and planning function to the business and the rest of HR. Right. I really thought you're onto something there, because when I think about it in life and in business, some stuff gets written down, some stuff doesn't. Some stuff is held in people's head, some stuff shows up in the data. The ability for the workforce planner who follows the data, understands the richness and detail of the plan and the mechanics and the flow and the math, to meet with the business leader and the HR business partner or whoever to add science and context together. That's where the magic happens. That's where the best decisions happen. And quite frankly, that only happens through dialogue. It doesn't happen by sending a spreadsheet over.
Yes, the blank Excel spreadsheet. Well, I always think, how would you feel if you were sent a blank Excel spreadsheet? Although maybe some people would be happy to get one of those. Anyway. So Paul, I'm just sort of conscious of time. Just encourage anybody on the call who does want to post more questions. But, just maybe some concluding thoughts on you about what we've talked about today.
Sure. I think there's a couple of things. The number one thing that stands out to me is first of all, the stakes are raised for an organization's ability to do planning at scale with, I don't want to say precision, right? But with discipline, I think is the real, right? And with transparency, so that the planning and the actual is visible at pace to the whole organization. We make better decisions when we are aware of the options and opportunities available to us. And so, I often, just like analytics for me, the planner, I think, their job isn't always to answer questions. It's to get everyone to ask better questions about the plan and the possibilities and the opportunities. And I think that's huge.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, I think it's for me, anybody who knows me know this is a very common agenda for me, it's really is just to be much more intentional around strategic workforce plan. What is the business trying to achieve, and how can you deploy this amazing capability? And SWP used in the right way is an amazing business capability. How can we do it to solve some real business problems? Because you know what, as soon as you can do that, nobody's going to question on, should we be investing in SWP or not, or should we be talking to our SWP team? You will be, as the phrase goes, drinking from the fire hydrant, because the work you produce will, and particularly if you can start measuring the impact you have and actually tracking actions and showing stuff being delivered against those actions, all of a sudden everybody goes, oh wow, this is really important, and why haven't we been doing this for 3 decades now? But the reality is very few businesses do this, so huge opportunity there.
It's the difference between driving through traffic with Google Maps to give you the traffic report or not. Who's going to get there faster with the best route? I have to say, Julian, there's a great question that just flashed up there.
Yeah.
Do you want to? Can we talk about that for a second?
Yeah. So Sean has asked, can workforce planning be undertaken without having a good understanding of the strategy and the future operating model?
So, of course not. But we don't always have the luxury of a level of strategy that's written with a level of granularity and specificity that we can make every single strategic workforce decision about. Okay. And I think that's frustrating, especially for a lot of early career people. They're like, what do you mean they haven't thought of every detail? Right. Hey, everyone, sometimes board decks are messy. It's a couple of bullet points, and everyone is human. We're just trying to figure out some stuff along the way. But, the phrase that comes to mind is directionally correct. And this is that notion of a zone of confidence, right? There are assumptions you may have to make, right? And that's what we all do. Write them down, make rational, reasonable, informed, educated assumptions. Make those assumptions transparent. That's where that zone of confidence. We may need between 3 and 5 people of this skill in this job, in this location, over this time. And as we get closer to that endpoint time, the moving target operating model date, it becomes clearer and we zone on in it, or we've created possibilities for new things, right? And so you have to also reach up into your leadership and ask them the questions that they may not have thought of because they don't have the domain expertise that you do. And
flipping it around the other way, which is, again, so often when I've done SWP work, it's actually it's the taking the first cut of the strategy and op model, even if it's not well understood, and turning it into an SWP plan, particularly if you can line it up against some of the financial plans, starts to make it real for everybody. Because if they're talking in abstraction, they're talking in bullet points, right? But nobody's ever really thought of, well, okay, we want to be the European leader in wealth management. Well, that's great, but your attrition rate in your wealth managers at the moment is like 30, 40% a year. So what, are you going to pay them differently? Are you going to train them differently? Where are these people are going to come from? We're going to drive this top line revenue for you in this gross margin.
Got it.
And all of a sudden it becomes real. So Sean, I think, it's really tough. Don't misunderstand me, and depending where you are and the politics of the organization. But I think, some constructive inquiry and some, hey, I've been doing some thinking about this. If we did that, it might look like that. What do you think? That's a really great way to start get some engagement and some traction and some buy-in. There's one other thing I just want to say, Paul. Sorry,
please.
It's super keen to just not lose this point. One of the things that's happening in the UK market, there's quite a few senior HR appointments happening where, and you know, the mix is slightly different, but people are being appointed to be, they have OD, SWP, people analytics,
Yeah.
usually workforce insights. They may have HR strategy, HR project portfolio, HR chief of staff. So I suppose what I want to do, whether, you know, where people are at different stages in their career, if you have that ambition and you have that sort of desire to start to, shall we say, rather than hold one kind of telescope, the SWP telescope, but, you know, you want to start holding some different lenses and different angles on this situation. You know, I think, I don't think there's definitely feels like there's a real momentum in the market now around that.
100%. And you can find that the soul of that by flipping this question around and saying, can the workforce plan influence the strategy and future operating model? And I see this being done in amazing ways. Pharma, I think, is leading the pack here. They're sitting there going, you know, they've been through their boom bust, right? You know, we have a hit record, you know, then the hit falls off, we lay a bunch of people off, now we go rehire. They're sitting and looking at what science do we have, what skills do we have, and how do we influence our product strategy based on that, right? What do we already have a structural competitive advantage of that we aren't taking advantage in our workforce, in our skills, et cetera? And so, you know, this is a huge unlock. And I think more and more companies are starting to look inward and say, what do we already possess that gives us competitive advantage, competitive lasting market opportunity within our strategic workforce? And how do we make that workforce more strategic and give it more strategic impact, or let it inform our strategy? Huge opportunity there.
Amazing. I'm just going to quickly pick up a question, which you probably haven't seen, Paul, because it's in the chat. But Claire Hart, the amazing Claire, who is wonderful, she's basically asked: is the understanding of skills of the workforce and skills required for jobs as important as understanding tasks, or tasks a new essential building block for SWP, or simply another new data point? Can I do a short answer to this? There's much we definitely don't have time to cover this. I'm going to give you my personal view. I think skills are an attribute of workforce supply or people. I think tasks are about understanding workforce demand, about understanding the work that the business needs to do. So really, you need to be able to understand both. And there's certainly some exciting developments at the market at the moment about being able to understand how those things are related to each other. Claire, I'd love to chat to you about that some further time when we've got more time. But great question and super important. If Paul and I proved nothing else, by the way, today, which is impossible to talk about SWP in an hour. So, but we've done our best. Paul, just a few words about Visier, just to finish up, maybe, and
sure,
you know, yeah.
Visier, the leader in workforce intelligence. We help people understand the workforce. We help them plan the workforce. We help them redesign the workforce. We help them see deeply into understanding the gaps and opportunities of the workforce. We don't just help HR, we help the business. And what's been amazing is being the leader in AI. So also helping HR not just deliver these insights to people through plain language, but also being able to deliver those to other systems and agents and all the infrastructure to deliver the context that both people need and agents need about workforce for the future. So we've been really blessed. And by the way, for those listeners in Europe, we have Outsmart UK coming up, and I wish I had those dates in front of me, but follow me on LinkedIn, follow Visier, and follow my Substack, and you can learn more.
Amazing, Paul. Thank you. Maybe one of your Visier colleagues can post that on the chat. Just a moment for those of you who don't get to your LinkedIn. Yeah, and just say, Lace, 22nd of September. Thank you. And just look, Lace, we're really active in the SWP market. We have an SWP club for anybody who's on the call who's not a member of our SWP club. I think we've had about 40 or 50 organizations come along to one of 3 sessions we've held over the last year. absolutely a peer-to-peer conversation, what people are doing in practice, learning from each other. We do a little bit of light facilitation, but nothing more than that. But we are working with clients and keeping it really simple. We do a lot of coaching around SWP, just literally helping clients who want to deliver it themselves, but need a little bit of guidance. We do a lot of capability build, so upskilling teams, sometimes building some of the machinery of SWP. And sometimes we do some SWP delivery for clients who need it.
And why do we work together, Julian? Because, the Lace Visier partnership, we work together because it is about technology and practice together, right? Workforce planning done well requires change. It requires an operating model. It requires bringing together IT, HR, the business and finance, and matching process to technology. And we work together to make clients successful with that. And we love the partnership. So thank you for that.
No, it's been very, very, very helpful. Thank you, Paul. And really just to say, Paul, thank you so much for making time for the conversation today. I really enjoyed it. I hope the attendees have as well. And look forward to the next conversation. Thank you so much.
Take care, everyone.